All right, what we're going to do is create a new project. We're going to call this tutorial spy game and click create. Now you probably won't get ads here. Just to start off with, we're going to create some simple sprites. And by simple, I mean really simple. So I'm going to edit this, create a new sprite. It's going to be 32 by 32. I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to fill it with a color. And click OK. Alright, so that's my first sprite. I'm going to call this SPR player. And that'll do for now. That's all I need. Now down here in objects, I'm going to create an object. And this is going to be object player. So obj underscore player. And it's going to use that sprite. Now, this part here is the part that I want to really look at today. So the events and actions that are associated with this object. So you've used GameMaker before, you've used it at year 10, maybe you've used it in your own time a little bit. But the way that GameMaker works is we have sprites. So they're the graphics that represent different things in the game. And then we have objects. And these objects can do different things and they will respond to different events that happen in the game. So this here is the events window where we put our handlers. So this part here, at the create event, so when the room is created, or sorry, when the object is created, it will do the actions associated with that event. So we're going to put a create event in. And we're also going to put in a step event. Now we're going to do all of this with code. Drag and drop is good, but it's really limiting. And also, by year 11, 12, 13, you should be starting to write in proper code. So while GameMaker's code is still limited compared to something like C# or C++, it does give a good foundation for writing proper readable code. So we're going to go into the create part, and we're going to put in a go to the control tab and put in an execute code. This brings up a new code window here, and I'm just going to bring it, edit my screen so that I can make this a lot bigger. So preferences, and then I'll just have to find where it is, scripts and code. And I'm going to change the font down here. I'm just going to make it size 22 so it's a little bit easier to read on the screen. So I'll go back into here. And the first thing I'm going to do, make this window a little bit bigger, is put in a comment with 3 forward slashes. Now what this is going to do is it's going to give my thing here a title. So 3 forward slashes will give it a title. And I'm going to call this setup initial variables and click the tick button. Okay, so that gives that block there a code. I know what this bit of code is going to do. So going back into here, I'm going to just put in some variables that I think I might need for this character. So this is going to be a top-down shooter that we're making here, and we're just putting in the top-down movement for the player. So we're going to put in a few different variables here. One of them is going to be called movement speed. Or maybe we'll just go move speed. And we're going to set this to 6. So the player is going to move roughly 6 pixels per frame as they're moving about. So we can change this later on. And it's important that we set a variable up now. And I'll show you why in just a moment. This little symbol on the end, the semicolon, is the end line statement. You don't need it in GameMaker, but it does really help when you start getting into some more complex things. So we'll leave that in there. So move speed is going to be our only thing that we need at the moment. However, later in the game, we'll probably set up a few other things. So let's set them up now. Health equals, I will call it player health. I don't like using the built-in ones. Player health equals 100. We'll say ammo count. We might prefix them all with player. Player ammo equals 50, and then we'll say player speed. Okay, so we're prefixing them all with the word player, and we could shorten that down to just P, But for now, we'll leave it as player. Okay, so we're going to need to keep track of speed. Later on, we'll keep track of health and ammo, and there might be a few other things, in which case we will add them back into here. So I can click OK, and that's the create part done. So when this object is created, it's going to set up these initial variables here. Now in the step event, we're going to just make it so it can move. So we're going to call this check player movement. Now I don't need to do it in capitals. It probably looks better if I don't. Check player movement. Now to check the player movement, we need to check to see whether something has happened. So we're actually kind of checking for an event within the step event. The step event is a loop. It constantly does this event every single frame. So our game's going to be running at about 30 frames a second. For 2D games, that's fine. 3D games, you really want 60 frames per second. 2D games, 30 frames per second is pretty good. We can bump that up, but we'll just leave it at 30 at the moment. So 30 times a second is going to be checking this code, and we want to say, hey, if the player is pushing the up key, then move up the screen. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have some variables here. We're going to define some variables that are going to keep track of the player's movement, and it's going to track them every frame and check to see if they're done. So we're going to put if. Now, the help menu in here is really good. So I'm going to open the help menu. I'm going to bring that across to here and go to index and type in keyboard, because that's what I want to check. And you can see there's a whole lot of different things down here for keyboards. Keyboard check direct. I'm not sure what that is, so let's open it. That's checking the hardware directly, so that could be something I might use. Returns whether the given key on the keyboard has just been pressed. That could be useful, but that's only talking about has it just been pressed. So it'll only register for the frame that it's been pressed. And this one is for being released. This one here, however, keyboard check, returns whether the given key on the keyboard is currently held down. That's the one that I want. Now, the way that it works, it says keyboard check, and then in brackets, you put the key. So we look here, if keyboard underscore check, and then in brackets, I put the key. Now, the way I use an if statement is I have to type if, and then the condition inside those brackets. So it's really important when writing in code that you follow and make sure that you've got the right brackets in the right places. So an if statement looks like that. Inside this bit, I put the condition, which is keyboard check. And then inside here, I put the key. So to know the key, I can go to keyboard constants. I can actually have a look down here. So there's a whole lot of keys here. So VK up. However, for my one, I actually want to use W, A, S, and D. So if you wanted to use up, down, left, right, it's VK up is one of them, VK down, etc. But to use letters, so keyboard characters, I have to use a function called ORD. And that's ORD, and then more brackets, and the capital version of the letter inside quotation. So it looks like this, ORD, and then inside here, W for up. Okay, and then I can check that those brackets are all working, and that's all good. So if the keyboard, the W key has been pushed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the location of this player object. Its current location will be wherever it starts in the room, and we might actually set a starting location in the create event in a moment, but we're going to modify this. So the X and Y axis go left and right. If you've done any basic maths, you'll know X runs left and right. So negatives go to the left and positives go to the right. The Y axis with a computer, well, that runs up and down as well, but the origin on a computer screen is actually this top left corner. And the origin of any window in GameMaker is the top left corner of the window. Going to the right is positive on the x-axis, going to the left is negative on the x-axis. Going down is positive on the y-axis, and this is one thing that confuses people, and going up is negative on the y-axis. So what we want to do is set the current value of y to the current value of y minus the player speed. So remember we set the player speed to 6 earlier. So we could type in 6 here, but then if we find that player speed is not actually what we want it to be, we'll have to go through and change all our code. So I'm just going to set it to player speed and hit the tick. Now this code here, every step it's going to run this code. If keyboard W is being held down, the Y value of the player is going to be now equal to the current Y value minus the player speed, so minus 6, so it's going to move up the screen. Now let's go and set up an initial X here. X, we're going to put it in the center of the room. Equals room underscore width divided by 2. And Y equals room underscore width divided by 2. That should be height. So we're going to put this in the center of the room. Now you might not want to do this in your game, of course, but just for this example, I want to put it directly in the center of the room. I'll need to make a room, and I'll put objects and put my object player. It doesn't matter where I put it really. I could put it up in the top left corner, because when I play the game, it goes into the center of the room like our code says. Now I can push A, S, and D all day long, and the computer is never going to do anything with those keys. But as soon as I push W, they start moving up the screen. Now if you think that's a bit fast, you might like to go into here and change this down to 3. Run the game again. And they move slower up the screen. So now anytime we want to reference the player speed, we can just, or change the player speed, we can change this number as long as we're referencing this everywhere else. So I'm going to set that back to 6. Now your challenge here and your task is to finish up this keyboard movement so that it moves on all 4 directions. Now incidentally, it will also work for 8 directions, okay? Because we've not, well, depending on how you code it. If you code this correctly, you should be able to have it moving on in 8 directions. Just a hint, the next one starts with if. Okay, so you're going to have 4 if statements in this that is going to move the player around the screen. And then when you come back for the next video, we'll look at adding in some obstacles for the player to collide with and not be able to move past. And also looking at snapping the player to a grid. So, actually we may not snap them to a grid, but we do want to get some AI later on and snap them to a grid. So we're going to want to look at moving the player around. You're going to get that done by the end of this video here. And then next video we'll look at possibly aiming or doing some other stuff with the mouse and keyboard. And obstacles, of course, so making a room that we can navigate within.